In the first episode of this series I titled The Art of the Save, I talked about the mentality of what it takes to become a goaltender and the skill set that you need to think about it and for coaches to look and see if you've got what it takes. In today's episode, I take a look at one of the most important parts of goaltending, angles, and you'll be surprised at the different directions that I take. Let's talk some puck. So what are angles? Well, angles are those imaginary lines that goaltenders need in order to be able to cover their net. It doesn't necessarily mean they're traced on the ice for them, but you should have a general idea of how angles work. But before we get there, the first thing you have to think about as in regards to angles is your depth, right? Because when you look at a goaltender who's back in his net, he looks relatively small, does he not? As he comes out further, he tends to be bigger and bigger. It's not necessarily that the goalie's growing as he comes out, but he's covering more angles because he's making himself bigger relative to where the puck is. That's what angles are all about. Every single shot that a player takes creates a triangle between the two posts and the puck. And the goaltender's job is to be able to recognize that angle and be able to make the save. That angle is what people normally call being square to the shot. Not the player. There's a very distinct difference. You can't be square to a player because the player is not where the shot's coming from, unless he's shooting with his feet. The player shoots with his stick. So what you need to do is you need to focus on squaring up to where the puck is. It's the most important part of goaltending. You're not stopping the player, you're stopping that little piece of rubber that's coming at you. So that's where you create that shooting triangle that we like to call. And that's where you get square. And how do you get square? Your shoulders are facing the puck, your hips, your toes. Your entire body is facing that one general area. That's not to say that that won't change on every pass, because every time the puck is moved, it creates a new triangle. And you have to get square to every single one of those shots as best as possible. When it's a stationary shot and the guy's coming down the wing and you can get that angle, it's fine. But on odd man situations where it's 2-on-1, 3-on-2, whatever the case might be, it's a little bit harder to do. So let's take a look at the goaltending depth. Here's your normal crease. Now, conservative depth would be identified as goaltenders who like to play closer to the goal line and mid-range to the crease. A perfect example of that, Sam Montembeault. Montembeault rarely comes out to the top of his crease when he's in his net. Why? Conservative goaltenders tend to play that far back because of the fact that they worry about their ability to move laterally. It's a much shorter distance to go side to side when you're deep in your net than it is when you're a little bit more out of your net and at standard depth. Standard depth is the normal place where goaltenders are taught to actually work on their angles. Then you have overly aggressive depth, which is the last part of it, where you come out way too far. And now, aggressive depth is also relative to your situation. For example, if a guy's coming in on a breakaway, then what you do is you come out aggressively to challenge because it's one-on-one. There's no chance he's going to pass the puck. So you know he's coming on you. It's one-on-one. Be aggressive. Make yourself as big as possible. But in situations other than that, you don't necessarily have to do that. One of the other important things when it comes to the depth in your net is how you actually arrange to get into those angles. A lot of goaltenders who come out to the top of the crease never reset. And what I mean by reset is they never go back to their post to be able to figure out where they are. It's extremely important to use your elbows to be able to decide where you are vis-a-vis the net, your glove. This way you know, and you could come out to the right angle when the shooter's coming in or when a play develops in your direction. But a lot of goaltenders will stay out. One of the things that I've always taught my goaltenders is that every time the puck leaves the zone, get back to your goal line and reset. Even if it doesn't go deep into the opposition zone, you want to be able to reset so you know where you are at all times in relation to your net. If you're out, you'd have to turn around and look to see where you are and reset. That half second could cost you the puck being behind you and in the net. So instead of doing that, you come out, you come back into your net to the goal line, and you come out afterwards. It's inside out as opposed to outside in when it comes to depth in goal. So now let's take a look a little bit more at conservative depth. When you take a look at conservative depth, and here is, I tried to find as good the graphics as I could to try to explain this to you, but here is one of those shooting triangles I talk about. The point of the triangle is always where the puck is, and the ends of the triangle are exactly where your posts are. Goalie's job is to be able to get in between those two posts and cover the angle as best as possible. But here it is. Even if you're far back, when you're looking at this particular goaltender's position, if you notice the net, there are still gaps over his left shoulder, in between his legs, and just below his blocker, which means there's still chances for him to be able to allow the puck through. While limited, that doesn't mean that a player of a certain talent can't get that puck past the goaltender, because more often than not, they'll pick that corner. But the way the butterfly was developed was for goaltenders to take away the bottom of the net and reduce the amount of percentage goals that come in along the ice. In doing that, they force players to shoot higher. Now, after that, the idea was, okay, players that shoot high don't always hit their targets because it's harder to do. When you're along the ice, it's a little bit easier to hit a net, right? Because you're not trying to elevate. We'll get to those elevated shots in a minute. But when you look at that conservative depth, a lot of times, if you're in that position, you leave the net open. You leave gaps. And when you leave gaps, those scoring opportunities are there. And we've seen that time and time again when it comes to guys like Sam Montembeault. There were goaltenders that could get away with it. Early on in his career, Henrik Lundqvist lived on the goal line because he was able to move that quickly. And good on him. But nowadays, or I should say, in the time it took him to retire, his ability to be able to move side to side was much less quick. And therefore, he picked his time to retire based on the fact that he couldn't exactly move as quickly as he could before. So that's conservative depth. When you're looking at standard depth, you cover a little bit more of the net. There are still gaps. You could still see them under the armpit. Puck can go into the top corner in relation to, again, you see the triangle as far as the puck is shot. But when you're at standard depth at the top of your crease and square to the shot, you tend to limit very much where a shooter can place the puck. In doing that, you're kind of forcing him to move the puck laterally, at which point the goaltender would have to move and reset the triangle. Once again, be square to the shooter after they move. Simple enough, right? But that's really important. Then comes the aggressive depth. When you look at it, take a look at how big the goalie is in relation to the net. That's because he's way out. He's much closer to the puck. So in relation to where the puck is, the goaltender is much bigger, and because of that, the net behind him can't be seen. So those are your three ideas as far as when it comes to depth, right? You've got conservative depth, you've got standard depth, and you've got aggressive depth. Again, aggressive depth is used only primarily on breakaways or one-on-one situations with a player, not necessarily in normal gameplay. Then there's the other part of that equation. When you line up on faceoffs, again, it's all about angles. Take a look at this diagram. This is generally how a goaltender lines up, and there's only a certain number of angles. Straight down the ice would be 90 degrees. To each face-off dot left and right, it would be about 60 to 65 degrees. And then 45 degrees to each face-off dot inside your own zone. So for a goaltender to set up at the top of his crease and square to the face-off dot where the puck is easy enough. And once the face-offs are won, then again you reset and you become square to the shot, but you're up high at the crease, at the top of the crease. So if a shot comes in, your chances to stop it are much more prevalent than if you were sitting back conservative just off your post pretty deep in your crease. And that's one of those things that I keep yelling about. Whether it's Dobesh or whether it's Montembeault, both guys tend to be deep in their crease. They're never at the top. They're sitting inside it. And when they sit inside it, when the pucks go to the face-offs, to the hash marks, as an example, they're nowhere near high enough to take away the net. The other night, against Washington, when Alex Ovechkin scored off the faceoff, right? Sam Montembeault was deep in his crease. Regardless, it was a quick shot. Montembeault would have had to have great reflexes to stop it. But at the same time, if he was at the top of his crease as opposed to being a foot back in his net, or from the top of the crease, I should say, then chances would have been better for him to stop the puck. Instead, it went in, and it was 1-0 for the Washington Capitals. But when you take a look at all of this, you say to yourself, okay, coach, you can go down in the butterfly, you can cover all those angles. But the thing goaltenders need to practice more than anything else is three-dimensional goaltending. And what I mean by that is your net's not along the ice. This isn't shinny hockey in the park where you're playing with 30 guys on the ice and you don't lift the puck and you have 2 guys' gloves there to represent the net. This is NHL hockey. This is regular hockey. So goaltenders don't only have to worry about that dimension where the puck's along the ice, they also have to worry about height. And again, scoping out, being aggressive, coming out to the top of the crease is very important relative to where the shots are elevated. Because overall, when you think about it, if a goalie net, for example, is 4 feet high, if a goalie's 3 feet and he stands on the goal line, you're going to have plenty of room to shoot at. But if the goalie comes out towards the puck, you don't have as much to shoot at, do you? Again, that elevation, forcing guys to shoot high. The minute you take away the top of the net, you're fine. And so those angles, from an elevation standpoint, are extremely important as well. And it comes down to realizing that, hey, I'm not looking at the player's eyes to see where he's looking because that's not where the puck is coming from. I'm watching the puck because the puck comes from the ice and will normally come up on an angle to go towards the top of the net. So how do goalies stop that? Well, it's called three-dimensional goaltending. And it's also called situational goaltending. Coming out, coming back. Coming out, coming back. It's all related to the situation. If a guy's in tight, of course you're going to be on the goal line. If a guy's in below the hash marks, more often than not, you don't need to be at the top of the crease to cover most of the net because that area is smaller. So how do you distinguish that? Well, here's another one of those fun graphics that I have that outlines all of that when you're taking a look at where you should be. You take a look at the bottom where the angles are smaller, like that dead angle or VHR-VH angle, and in that case, you have to be a quarter of the way in the crease. When a guy's above the hashes, you get out to the top of the crease. When a guy's in the slot or above the top of the circles, you're right at the top of the crease, hips out completely. So that's how you have to look at it. But when it comes to the relationship to the puck being high or low, that's completely different. And when you look at that, the Swedes have the best way of doing it. It's a way that we were taught when we were younger because we played a stand-up style. But as the butterfly was implemented, goalie coaches got away from using string. And you're going to laugh at me and say, string? Yes, string. You take a puck, you spool string around it, and you go to the 4 corners of the net. Kind of like this. And so the way you teach a goalie how far he has to be is, if this were any other circumstance, you would use a string that was long enough to go to any area, right? Because you're going to be on a fulcrum, right? Where you're going back and forth. And as that fulcrum moves, right? And you go side to side, your area moves. And your area, basically, your goalie coach would say you have to make sure that your pads and your shoulders are touching each one of the strings. And then you know you've got your angle covered. It was a brilliant way to teach guys when they were young because really, oftentimes we'd lose the net, right? Nowadays, it's a lot different. So now, if you line up the angle, you take the example that we have there on the screen, and you put the puck in an area, your goalie comes out from the goal line, comes towards the puck, and the minute he touches the strings, he stops because he knows that's where he has to be to stop that puck. And you do it at different areas of the ice. It doesn't always have to be the same place. And you get him to focus on it because, after all, angles are a goalie's best friend. They limit the amount of work that he has to do to stop a puck because his body's going to be in the right position for the puck to hit him. But it's never as simple as just angles, right? In episode 1, I talked about reflexes. One of the things that we're going to talk about in this series, as far as goalies are concerned, is their natural ability to be able to play the position. How does that come? You don't come out of the womb ready to play goalie, right? There's certain things that you develop over time, right? Doing different things that actually teach you how to stop pucks, right? For example, well, you know what? I'm going to save it for another episode. Why don't I do that? In the meantime, if you guys have questions about angling in regards to goaltenders, and if there's something about this episode you don't understand in regards to the way I put it, please let me know. But always remember, every time a player lines up for a shot, goalies aren't trying to play the player, they're trying to play the puck. And they need to be square to that puck. If they're not square, then that means that the puck has a chance to get in because they're not as wide as they can be. They need to be at the right depth. So, beyond the circles, be at the top of your crease. Players inside the hash marks can back up a little bit. But if you're up high, you're fine. So, in the next episode, we'll talk about goalie movement around the crease because it's a super important part of the development of goaltending and the importance of goaltenders in general being able to stop pucks, because it's not all about just standing in front of a puck. You got to be able to move. We talked about lateral movement earlier. How do you develop that? Because again, it's not something you learn naturally. It comes over time. So I'll outline some of those different ways to teach footwork in our next episode. Thanks for watching. See you on the next episode of The Art of the Save.